Good evening, everybody. My name is Stan the Man. You have tuned into Real Talk on the Dream Nation Network. Today, we're going to dive into the transgender situation, talking about detransitioning. Stay tuned. Hello, everybody. My name is Stan the Man, and this is Real Talk on the Dream Nation Network. We're talking about transgenders detransitioning, coming to the realization that they made a terrible, terrible, terrible mistake in their lives, and how it affects them and those around them. And well, let's get into it and check out this interview.
I was born biologically female. I began transitioning and taking hormones when I was 18 years old. Growing up, I couldn't pinpoint what my issues were, and then I realized that it might be a gender issue. When I turned 18, I did go to Planned Parenthood. I just stated that I had gender dysphoria, and they gave me testosterone a week later. Before I went on hormone therapy, I wasn't required to see any therapist or any sort of a doctor at all. So about a year and a half after I was on hormones, I decided to see a therapist about getting approval for top surgery. I walked in on one appointment for half an hour, and then she emailed my insurance for approval, just like that. Even at this point, when I was passing as a man, I still had these doubts in the back of my mind that said, what if you're wrong? What if you made a mistake? In the end, I decided not to do the surgery. At that point that I decided to detransition and live my life as a woman again. Even as an adult, it took me a long time to figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. Kids especially need to see a therapist before making any sort of permanent medical decisions, like going on hormone blockers and surgeries especially. I mean, they don't even know what they want for dinner the next day, let alone what gender they are. The biggest mistake that I made was that I did not get the right amount of therapy or medical advice needed. These days, if you tell a parent if their child thinks that they might be transgender or has gender dysphoria, to wait and really consider it, maybe seek other therapy, you're just seen as transphobic now because you're not accepting people. I'm not anti-trans at all. I support the trans community very much, but I also support medical responsibility.
If you question this at all, you get labeled really quickly, correct?
You do, immediately as transphobic.
Why do you think that is?
I think that a lot of the transgender community, they push so much for acceptance that when you immediately, or anytime you start to question them, even if it's out of the goodness of your heart, just trying to make sure that they're making the right decision, anything that goes against their narrative is just immediately labeled as transphobic.
After you started to transition, how else did you begin to change your life to live as a man?
I had changed my name. I started wearing a binder. I even moved cities because at the time I was very hesitant to actually come out to coworkers. So I moved about 4 hours away. I got a completely different job and introduced myself as a trans man.
Okay. And what happened when you began to schedule time to get a double mastectomy?
I haven't had any top surgeries, but I did get approved for it.
Okay, that's what it is. You got approved for it.
I did. I got approved. And how that worked, it was scarily easy to do because I had just called a therapist and I had scheduled one appointment, for a 30-minute session to talk about it. And I essentially walked in. I said, I identify as transgender and I want to get top surgery. And we chatted for a bit, maybe for half an hour. And at the end of the session, she wrote me an approval letter to send to my insurance. And then I got approved just like that.
When you first started, you went in, you said, to Planned Parenthood.
Yes.
And they gave you testosterone immediately.
Yeah, I essentially just made a phone call and said, I want to transition. And it was immediately given. I got a prescription and went to pick it up a week later.
Did they ask you questions? Did they do any psychological testing? Did they ask you why? What was your motive?
It was completely self-diagnosed. Well, self-diagnosed. I claimed that I had gender dysphoria and I wanted to transition, and they didn't really ask me any questions about it. I just called them and I said, when can I get this? And they just said they needed to write me a prescription for it and send it. And that's essentially
You
what
had no
happened.
proof that you were
I never saw
gender
a therapist
dysphoric.
about it.
You didn't.
Yeah, I didn't talk to anyone about it. Nobody medically professionally. I had just looked up, I did some like trans research, I guess, into the transgender community and everybody online, and they just seemed so happy and successful. And at the time, I didn't see any information on detransition or any like the negatives about it. And so I kind of got completely wrapped into that.
Gender dysphoria can be a miserable way to live if that's what they're experiencing. And there are criteria for that. And one of the criteria is time, that is persistent across time. But you didn't have any of those criteria. You didn't demonstrate that. You didn't document that. You didn't have any professional that documented that.
Nope.
You said, I want testosterone. They gave it to you.
Yeah, I had confused because I had become uncomfortable with how society had seen me as a
That, yo- that young lady didn't know what she wanted to do with her life. She was totally confused. And the professionals, the so-called professionals that was supposed to help her, didn't help her at all. It was like she was being the one that told them what was going on. She had no nobody to talk to. She had no kind of diagnosis, anything. And they told her, well, go ahead, transition. And essentially just messed her life up. Just totally destroyed her life.
From the time I was about 5 years old, I started to question my gender identity. But at the time, trans wasn't as big of an issue as it was today. And so I just kind of let it go for quite a while. Then when I was 13, I was surfing the web one day and I found this website for female to male people. And it sounded like these were people who were fully transitioning. And I saw that and I thought, that's who I am. I'm a male trapped in a woman's body.
And you know, they say that the mind is not fully developed until late into your 20s. And these children that think they know what's best for them really don't.
I think one of the things a lot of kids today are not taking into consideration is if you transition, you can never fully change sex. So I knew that if I attempted to transition, I would be a 5'2" man with a vagina. That did definitely deter me for a long time. But then the narrative that I was hearing from trans activists and even medical providers was that if I didn't transition, I would probably kill myself. And given that I was someone who had already suffered from mental health issues in the past, I didn't want to risk that. I thought medical transition was my best option. At the age of 28, I just felt like I didn't have another choice. I tried being a woman for so long and I wasn't happy. So I decided to go full steam ahead with my medical transition. I started off by getting a prescription for testosterone. And to do that, I called up Planned Parenthood because I'd heard they provided gender affirming services. And I thought I would have to go through some kind of process to get the testosterone, whether it was psychological evaluation or a certain number of visits with psychiatrists, etc. But instead, what happened is I talked on the phone for 30 minutes with a doctor I'd never met in person, and I got prescribed testosterone over the phone. I had asked for a low dose because I told the doctor at Planned Parenthood that I was a semi-professional singer and that my voice was important to me. And the doctor prescribed me what I thought was a low dose. But then later, talking to other people, they had started at half the dose that I was on. I was prepared for my voice to get deeper, but nobody told me it would be painful to speak. Nobody told me it would feel like there was a barrier in my throat when I would go to vocalize, whether it was for singing or even just being around my friends at a social gathering. It was hard to like project my voice over music, and no one warned me that that was a possibility. I was afraid to be angry or complain about what had happened at all because I didn't want to say anything that would be like damaging to the trans community or prevent anyone else from transitioning. So I just kind of kept my mouth shut for a while, but then eventually the pain and just the gravity of what had happened, that I would never have my natural singing voice back ever again, just hit me. And that was one of the things that led me to sort of start questioning the gender ideology and whether affirmative care is really appropriate for most people. I had top surgery scheduled as well, a double mastectomy. To obtain permission for that, I also talked to a different doctor at Planned Parenthood who, again, without meeting me, had written me a recommendation letter for top surgery. But when the testosterone just had such devastating effects on my life, I realized it might not be a good idea for me to make any more permanent changes for now. So I ended up canceling my top surgery, and I also canceled my legal name change, which I had already turned in paperwork for that. And I was also having a bunch of health side effects as well. I was having body pains, especially a concerning pain in my right side. I was having heart palpitations, and I was feeling nauseous all the time, just starting to really not feel physically well. And so I just got to this breaking point where I was like, I'm not ready to go back to living as a woman, but I just know that I have to stop medically transitioning. This is not worth it to me at all anymore. So at that point, I just stopped taking testosterone cold turkey because I didn't want my voice to change anymore. If I wasn't worried about my voice as much, I probably would have tapered off of it, because usually, if you go off of a medication, tapering off is the way to go because it can be really shocking to your system. But I didn't do that. I went off cold turkey. Hi, TikTok. I'm back again today with a big announcement regarding my name. So my name associated with this account is no longer going to be Tony Martin, because I am now going by Kat Anthony. At first, I thought I bounced back within like a month or two, but it really took about 6 months for the way my body operated to start normalizing again. And for the first month, I've never felt worse in my life. I sank into a deep depression because as an adult, if you have no,
and that's because you trying to go against nature. You were born a female and you thought you wanted to be a male. To me, there's no such thing as a transgender person. There's no such thing. We have two genders on this earth, male and female. The Lord God said, it is not good for man to be alone. I will make a helper suitable for him. Now the Lord God had formed out the ground all of the wild animals and all the birds in the sky. He brought them to the man to see what he would name them. And whatever the man called them, each living creature, that would be their name. So the man gave the names to all the livestock, the birds in the sky, and all the animals. But for Adam, no suitable helper was found. So the Lord God caused the man to fall into a deep sleep. And while he was sleeping, he took one of the man's ribs and then closed up the place with flesh. Then the Lord God made a woman from the rib. He had taken out of the man and brought her to the man. And the man said, "This is now bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. She shall be called woman, for she was taken out of me. That is why a man leaves his father and mother and is united to his wife, and they become of one flesh." So the God made man and he made woman. He didn't make trans woman or trans man. He made man and woman. A man should leave his mother and father and be as one with his wife.
Sex hormones in your body, it makes you feel awful. It just drains all your energy. I was just basically bedridden. Like I couldn't even get up or do anything for myself. So that was like a really, really dark period, having lost my voice and then just having like hours and hours in my bed, like not doing anything. It was probably the worst depression I've ever been in.
Since stopping testosterone, my voice isn't as high and girly as it used to be, but I can still kind of sound like two different people if I try.
Now, like a year and a half later, I look in the mirror and at least from a superficial level, my body and face look the same as they did before transitioning. But also during this period where I was kind of detoxing from the testosterone, I started to look into the studies about gender transitions. And I realized I'd been in an echo chamber and I'd been told some really harmful things by trans activists that totally distorted my view of the world and my gender or my biological sex. I just stopped believing in gender identity. Once I let go of that, it was actually extremely freeing, and I was able to accept myself as a female, as a woman, without attaching any kind of toxic negative gender stereotype to that. Because the truth with what's called transition, I actually call it body modification and mutilation, because it's impossible for humans to change sex. So by affirming gender dysphoria and telling someone they actually can be the opposite sex, it's only going to encourage and enable that person to mutilate their body and sterilize themselves. My parents didn't affirm me, and at the time it did make me very angry, but looking back, I'm very thankful for that, because I think that if I would have been able to transition as a child, I think I would be looking back and I would be thinking, how could you enable this? How could you have gone along with this when I was too young to consent? And I do think that in the future, we're going to see a lot of children who have detransitioned being angry with their parents and feeling betrayed by them. Although I do have empathy for the parents as well.
And to that point, that reminds me of D. Wade and his son. His son was so young, thinking he wanted to be a woman. And D. Wade just goes right along with it. Him and Miss Union. And I'm curious to see how this young man will feel in 10, 15 years after transitioning to what he think he's a woman. Because like the girl said, you can never be a man can never be a woman, and a woman can never be a man. No matter what these doctors do to their bodies, it just would not be so. A trans woman will never have a period, will never have go through menopause, will never go through any of the things that women go through. And a trans man, a girl that wants to be a man, will never be as strong as the man standing next to her, or him, or whatever. Or he would never run as fast, or he would, it's just, women can never be men, and men can never be women. I don't know what brought us to this point, but it is wrong.
Because I realize that this is what our politicians, some pediatricians, certainly trans activists are instructing them to do. They're telling them to affirm. So parents may believe they're doing what's correct, but I think in the future, looking back, it's going to be a huge scandal, and we're going to have a lot of regretful young people who can't have children, or their voices irreparably changed, or they've cut off body parts that they'll never get back.
And that was a nice story. Like I said, a man is made to leave his wife, his mother.
Well, the friends have been in protest for a while because they're going
leave his mother and father and cleave to his wife. A man can never be a woman, and a woman can never be a man. This has been Real Talk, everybody. My name is Stan the Man on the Dream Nation Network. And we'll see you next week. Have a good day. Have a good week, everybody.